People who have stories they want to share, but have not found a question relevant to them. What are your stories? Story 1. I live in Maine. My brother is a talented hobbyist photographer, so one Christmas he gave my girlfriend and me some beautiful prints of photos he had taken of us. To fill out the gift bag, he also included a few scratch tickets. Lucky for us, we won $30,000 on one of those tickets. We used most of the money to pay off the interest on our student loans, not the most exciting expense. But we set aside the rest for a dream vacation to Ireland, a place my girlfriend and I had always wanted to visit. It was incredible. A few years later, my brother, who lives in Deceit, had a new girlfriend. She had spent a year studying abroad in Ireland during college, so we bonded over our mutual love for the country. The conversation eventually moved on to other topics, as conversations do. Later, someone mentioned, "Hey, did you know that your brother's girlfriend spent a year in Ireland?" "Oh yeah, we talked about that earlier." "So cool," I replied. With Ireland back on the table, we started reminiscing about the trip. I mentioned a stand-up comedy show we stumbled upon one night in the basement of a small pub. The space was tiny, with maybe 20 people in the audience. My brother's girlfriend chimed in, saying she had been to a show there once too. I started recalling the comedians. One was a black Scottish man, another was a young woman with one side of her head shaved, and the MC was even funnier than the main acts. Her jaw dropped. She remembered those same comedians. It seemed too wild to be true, so I looked up the pub's old event schedules to see if the acts had performed on multiple nights. They hadn't. That specific lineup happened only once. What are the odds? My girlfriend and I had attended the same 20-person basement comedy show as my brother's future girlfriend, in a completely different country, during a trip funded by a scratch ticket gift from my brother. Pretty amazing. Story 2. When I, F44, was 18 years old, I was traveling alone from the US to visit my parents, who lived in Russia. My connecting flight in a notoriously rough US city was canceled due to weather, grounding all flights. It was late at night, and I was young, naive, and unsure of what to do. I stood in the airport, trying not to cry, feeling utterly lost. A well-dressed man, probably in his late 20s or early 30s, noticed my distress. Realizing I would be stranded, he offered to help me find a hotel. He explained he was already on the phone with his travel agent and managed to secure 2 rooms. Then he offered to share a cab with me. Looking back, it was risky, but I got in the cab with this stranger and headed to the motel. At the time, I had no cash, and this was long before credit cards were widely accepted for cabs or the existence of rideshare apps. When we arrived, I tried to figure out how to pay using my credit card, but he covered the cab fare. The motel was a total dive, located in a really rough area. While we were checking in, a prostitute casually walked into the lobby to ask if we had any condoms. I was too naive to grasp how dangerous the situation was. When I attempted to pay for my room, the man stepped in and insisted on covering the cost of both rooms. Before parting ways, he asked how I planned to get back to the airport. I told him I'd figure it out, though I had no plan and no money for transportation. He walked me to my room but didn't stop there. No suggestions for drinks, no requests to hang out, nothing inappropriate. As he continued down the hall, he simply said, "Please make sure you lock the door." The next morning, the front desk called my room to inform me that my boyfriend had left an envelope for me. Inside was a $20 bill and a note that read, "Use this to get back to the airport." I never learned his last name or how to contact him. He didn't expect anything in return, and his kindness has stayed with me ever since. Thinking about this moment has restored my faith in humanity countless times. If this man ever hears this story, he'll remember the city where we were stranded. What an incredible human being. Story 3. When I was in college, I was dating a guy who lived in an off-campus apartment. One night, as he was walking me down to the lobby to head home, we noticed a woman sitting on the floor just outside the elevator. She was wearing a skirt, her blouse was on backward, and she was digging through her purse for her keys. At first, we stepped around her, assuming she was just another drunk college student, which wasn't unusual in our city. But something felt off. I turned back and asked if she needed help. She was slurring badly, insisting she lived there and needed her keys. I offered to help her to her apartment. With difficulty, I managed to prop her up, get her into the elevator, and walk her down the hallway to the door she kept repeating. I asked if she had a roommate or a boyfriend who could help, and she kept saying, "He's in there." I knocked, but there was no answer. I knocked again, louder, still nothing. Meanwhile, she slid back down to the floor, drooling, and clearly on the verge of being sick. She couldn't tell me her name or give me any useful information. I decided to go through her purse, hoping to find her ID, phone, or something to help. On top of the contents was her balled-up underwear. My stomach turned as I pushed it aside and found her work badge, which had keys attached. I tried them in the door, but they didn't work. She insisted they were the right keys, but they clearly weren't. I went back into her purse and found some mail with her name on it, but the address was in a completely different part of the city. My stomach dropped. This woman wasn't just drunk. Her blouse was backward, her underwear was in her purse, and she was insistent that this was her apartment even though it wasn't. After 45 minutes, I managed to get her phone unlocked. I had no idea who to call, so I tried the contact labeled Mom. After a few attempts, her mom answered, groggy and confused. I explained the situation, that I was a stranger trying to help her daughter. Her mom confirmed the address on the mail was her actual home. She gave me her number and thanked me for helping. Next, I focused on getting the woman home. I flagged a cab, took her to her address, and got her inside. I placed her in bed, put her phone on the charger, left a couple of water bottles next to her, and placed a trash bin nearby. I texted her mom to let her know she was home and safe. Then I left. The next day, while I was on the bus between classes, her mom called me. She thanked me profusely for helping her daughter and shared what had happened. The woman had gone on a date with someone she met on an app. They'd gone to a restaurant and had 2 drinks, but she became extremely intoxicated very quickly. It turned out he had drugged her drink while she was in the restroom. He took her back to his apartment, assaulted her, and then left her in the lobby where I found her. The door we had been knocking on was his door. The woman remembered almost nothing after having the drink, but she was sore and noticed a latex smell when she went to the bathroom. I realized I should have taken her to the hospital instead of home. She could have gotten treatment sooner and had a report documented. That same day, I wrote down everything I remembered in excruciating detail in a Word document. I told her mom about it and said I was willing to testify, talk to the police, or do anything to help. Her mom thanked me but said her daughter wanted to move on. A few months later, I texted her mom again to ask how her daughter was doing and to remind her that I was still available if needed. That was the last time we spoke. Years have passed, but every time I get a new computer, I make sure to transfer that Word document to a safe place. I don't know if they'll ever need it, but if they do, I'll be ready. Story 4. This is the story of how my mother reunited with her long-lost sister. My mother was born in the far east of Russia. Her father had survived the horrors of the gulags, and she grew up in a small settlement primarily populated by ex-prisoners and their families. Before marrying my grandmother, my grandfather had survived a mine collapse. During his recovery, he had an affair with a nurse that resulted in a child. After his release and settling down with my grandmother, my grandfather established contact with his daughter, my aunt. They met a few times, and he even brought my mother along on occasion to meet her. At the time, my aunt lived in a city 5,000 kilometers to the south. However, when the government allowed my mother's family to relocate across the country, they lost touch with my aunt. This was long before cell phones or social media, and reconnecting became nearly impossible. The last time my mother saw her sister, she was about 12 years old, and her sister was 20. 17 years later, my mother was on the Moscow metro, taking my sister to music school. She noticed a woman sitting across from her and felt a strange, gravitational pull toward her. She couldn't stop staring, trying to figure out why this woman felt so familiar. Suddenly it clicked. As the train pulled into her stop, my mother jumped up, grabbed the woman's arm and said, "Are you my aunt, the daughter of my grandfather? Get off the train with me now." To her amazement, she was right. That's how, after 17 years of no contact, my mother happened to reunite with her long-lost sister on a crowded Moscow metro train. Story 5. When I worked for the U.S. Forest Service, USFS, there was one week I was flown in by helicopter with a wildland fire crew to a remote mountaintop deep in the backwoods of Idaho. We were miles away from civilization. To give you an idea of how isolated we were, when one of our crew members accidentally cut through his boot with a chainsaw, it took 6 hours for a medevac to get him out. Our team was mostly young people, primarily young women, assisting a crew of slightly older men. The only other woman on the mountain was Tara, the chief of their crew, a fact that would soon become important. One night, my crew had gone to bed early, leaving a couple of the older men up drinking by the fire. Out of nowhere, they heard an awful, blood-curdling scream, like a woman being tortured. Panicked, they ran to check on us, but everyone in our crew was safe. That's when they remembered Tara. She had chosen to sleep in a hammock, far away from the group. The men sprinted through the dark to find her. When they arrived, they saw Tara facing down a massive cougar. The unearthly screams they'd heard weren't hers. They were coming from the cougar itself. Despite the shouting, the cougar didn't back off. It had clearly been stalking Tara, singling her out as the only one not sleeping in a group. Even when more people arrived and started yelling and revving a chainsaw to scare it off, the cougar continued to stalk her. Finally, one of the men ran at it, screaming and wielding an axe like a berserker. That finally made the cougar retreat. I'll never forget that sound. The cougar's terrifying scream echoing through the mountains. And I'll never forget the realization that the cat had been circling just outside the reach of the firelight for who knows how long, watching us and waiting for an opportunity to strike. Story 6. My great-grandmother spent the last years of her life in a nursing home. She was about 95 years old with minimal eyesight and hearing. One day she confided in my mother that she was afraid of the lady in black. "What woman in black?" my mother asked. "The one that stands by my bed every night. I think she's finally coming to get me." Naturally, my mother dismissed it as a figment of my great-grandmother's imagination. One evening during a visit, my great-grandmother said, "I think I'm going to die tonight. Can you stay? I don't want to be alone when the lady in black comes for me." To comfort her, my mother stayed the night, sleeping uncomfortably in an old armchair beside the bed. In the middle of the night, my mother woke up to an unusual noise she couldn't immediately identify. Her heart dropped as she saw a figure in a long black gown standing at the foot of the bed. My mother let out a blood-curdling scream, waking half the nursing home. The scream startled the lady in black, who turned and fled, only to run into a nurse rushing in to investigate the commotion. It turned out the lady in black was my great-grandmother's bedridden and supposedly immobile neighbor. Nobody had known she could walk, let alone dress herself in her favorite black gown and wander the halls at night. She had been entering other residents' rooms, standing by their beds and even watering their plants in the dead of night. Apparently, other residents had seen her too, but didn't dare say anything, fearing they'd be thought crazy for claiming a ghost was haunting their rooms. Story 7. Our family pet growing up was Arwen, a massive Airedale Terrier. She was the light of our lives and truly the world's best dog. She had a gentle heart. She would herd the chickens and let baby chicks nestle into her fur, sitting perfectly still in the sunshine so as not to disturb them. But her most heroic moment came when my brother Liam, about 10 years old at the time, was trying to move our basketball hoop and its heavy base out into the yard for the summer. Unbeknownst to him, 2 rattlesnakes were coiled under the base. Arwen noticed them immediately. Before Liam could get too close, she leapt between him and the snakes. Both Liam and my dad, who was nearby, saw the snakes strike Arwen as she stood her ground. My dad acted quickly, grabbing Liam and pulling him away, while simultaneously pulling Arwen to safety with his other hand. He then sent Liam running to grab the hatchet to dispatch the snakes. Once the danger was gone, we brought Arwen inside and laid her on her bed. We called the vet, who grimly said that if she'd been bitten by both snakes, there was little hope for her survival. He offered to come out and put her down to spare her suffering, but my mom refused. She was determined to fight for Arwen's life. She researched and found that loading a dog with Benadryl could help counteract snake venom. Without hesitation, she gave Arwen the treatment. Arwen lay still for 3 agonizing days, swollen and bleeding. We were heartbroken, fearing the worst. Then on the 3rd day, she got up. She walked around, and against all odds, she recovered. Arwen went on to live 5 more years, passing away at the remarkable age of 17. She was a hero, a protector, and the best dog we could have ever asked for. Story 8. When I was in high school, I decided to eat some magic mushrooms right before curfew. I got home, my family went to bed, and I was quietly enjoying my evening in my bedroom as the mushrooms kicked in. Suddenly, I heard a massive boom, ear-shattering and earth-shaking. At that moment, I was deep in the effects of the mushrooms, looking around in confusion like, what on earth just happened? I stayed still, waiting for some kind of fallout or chaos, but nothing happened. After a few minutes, curiosity got the better of me, and I crept out to the living room. The house was eerily quiet, but I noticed something strange. The front door was wide open. Confused and on edge, I peeked outside and saw people running down the street. But strangely, everyone in my house was still fast asleep, including my mom, who was a notoriously light sleeper. At this point, I didn't trust my own judgment. Were the mushrooms just hitting me harder than I thought? Or was this some kind of apocalyptic event? Paralyzed with uncertainty, I went back to my room, grabbed a bunch of blankets, and set up a watch post in the corner of my room. I was too scared and confused to do anything else. That's where my mom found me sleeping the next morning. She woke me up to tell me that the neighbor's house had blown up. Apparently, the neighbors were on vacation, and a slow gas leak had filled their house. When their refrigerator clicked on, it triggered a massive explosion. The entire house was reduced to rubble, and somehow my entire family had slept through it. Story 9. When I was a teenager, I was part of an iconic trio of friends, Patrick, Pinky, and me. As we got older, life pulled us in different directions, so we mostly hung out in pairs. It became harder to coordinate all three of us meeting up. About 5 years ago, we were all finally free just after Christmas and decided to meet at our favorite spot, Denny's. Patrick had been dating this girl who was just awful. She was mean, their relationship was toxic, and they fought constantly. Despite my feelings about her, Pinky had made a painting of Patrick and his girlfriend as a Christmas gift and brought it to the restaurant. We also had a video camera with us, so this whole night was caught on tape. During the meal, Patrick dropped a bombshell. His girlfriend was trying to get pregnant. My immediate reaction, caught on video, was a blunt, "Why?" That comment sparked a deep heart-to-heart. Pinky and I shared our concerns about how bad the relationship was and tried to convince Patrick that having a baby with this person was a terrible idea. Patrick eventually opened up about his true feelings and how unhappy he was. But then we had this awkward problem, the painting. What were we supposed to do with it now? It felt too weird to give it to him after that conversation. Pinky and I took the painting into the women's restroom, where we noticed an empty nail on the wall. We hung it up. Somehow it fit perfectly. The colors coordinated with the bathroom's decor, and it looked like it belonged there. It was hilarious. We left it there, and over the years, whenever one of us was in town, we'd visit Denny's to check if the painting was still hanging in the restroom. Eventually, that Denny's closed down, but the painting was saved. It now lives at Patrick's brother's house, a quirky, tangible reminder of our silly, unforgettable friendship. Story 10. Back in early 2018, when I first moved to Utah to start school, I had a random encounter at a 7-Eleven that has stuck with me ever since. There was a girl asking for directions to the train station. I pointed her in the right direction, but noticed she was walking. I figured, why not? I have an hour until class. I'll just give her a ride. During the drive, she opened up about her situation. She had been studying or volunteering, I can't remember exactly, in a Spanish-speaking country like Puerto Rico or Costa Rica for months. She'd recently moved to the area to explore and was staying with an old high school friend. Unfortunately, things took a bad turn when he flipped out on her. She told me she'd had to jump out of his truck because he wouldn't pull over. She planned to take a bus back home, but had left her wallet at his place. I offered to help her retrieve it, but as we pulled up to his house, he started following us. Sensing danger, I made a quick U-turn and decided it wasn't worth the risk. She used my phone charger to contact her parents, who sent her money for a ticket home. I dropped her off at the train station, but I was running late for class, so I didn't get her name or number to check if she made it safely. To this day, I think about her and wonder if she's okay. If this story sounds familiar and you remember a buff, bearded Mexican guy in a white Volkswagen hatchback helping you out, let me know. It's been on my mind ever since. Story 11. I love my backpack. It's not fancy, just a basic Element rucksack, but it's the only fashion brand item I own, and it brings back fond memories of middle school, when Element gear was all the rage. A couple of years ago, I was backpacking and road tripping across Canada. We stopped in Hope, British Columbia, for a meal before continuing to Kelowna, where we'd booked accommodations for a couple of nights. When we arrived in Kelowna around 9 p.m. and unpacked the car, I couldn't find my backpack. My heart sank. It contained everything. My passport, house keys, iPad, Canadian currency, favorite sweatshirt, phone charger, you name it. I assumed the worst, that someone had stolen it from the car while we were eating. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I called the diner we'd stopped at just in case I'd left it inside. To my relief, the kindest girl answered the phone and confirmed they had my backpack. I asked her to send it to Kelowna and offered to cover the shipping cost with cash from the envelope inside the bag. She agreed immediately, and I hung up feeling so much better. Unfortunately, being the weekend, the backpack didn't arrive before we left Kelowna for a week-long camping trip through Alberta and the Icefields Parkway. I asked our Airbnb host to forward the package to our next stop in Calgary, again offering to let them take the cost out of the cash in the bag. They agreed, and we set off for the Rockies. That week was incredible. With no signal and minimal possessions, I fully immersed myself in nature. I finally understood Bilbo's line from The Lord of the Rings. I want to see mountains again, Gandalf, mountains, and then find somewhere where I can rest. It was a transformative experience. But leaving Banff brought me back to reality. We arrived in Calgary on Canada Day, so everything was closed. I spent another night worrying about my backpack, but first thing the next morning, I went to the UPS store. Seeing that familiar burgundy color was such a relief. Everything was still there, minus about $40 for shipping. Now every time I see my backpack, I'm reminded of the kindness of strangers and the incredible adventure I had in Canada. It's a tangible memory of how wonderful people can be when you simply ask for help. Story 12. My grandparents have lived in the countryside since they got married 60 years ago. They built the house they still live in, surrounded by fields and quiet landscapes. At some point, the neighbor's house burned down, and the land went unused for decades. Over time, it turned into a lush area with mature trees, wild grasses, fruit trees, and berry bushes. My grandfather maintained part of the land, expanding their property line slightly in two directions to create extra grass and a walking trail. The area became a little oasis of greenery amidst the drab, flat farmland stretching for miles. I practically grew up there, picking berries with my dad to make jams and pies, playing with my cousins in the abandoned barn and old storage silo that had belonged to the original house. A couple of years ago, the land was sold because the aging owners no longer wanted to maintain it. On my most recent visit, I was heartbroken to see what had happened. The new owners had completely razed the land. All the trees and grass were gone, leaving the area barren and flat. The new owners planned to rezone the land from residential and farmland to industrial to build a factory. Worse, they're trying to reclaim the bit of extra land my grandfather had maintained for decades, which cuts through the mature pine trees he planted 30 years ago as a windbreak in part of their garden. It's devastating, not only because I've always known that land as a lush green haven, but also because my grandparents, who have enjoyed 60 years of peace and quiet, may now spend their final years staring at a factory next door and dealing with a road running right behind their house. There goes the peace and quiet that meant so much to them and to me. Story 13. There was this girl in middle school who I kept accidentally hitting in a series of bizarre, unfortunate incidents. The first time, I was carrying my guitar on my shoulder in the hallway. She said, "Hey, Anon," and as I turned to respond, I accidentally smacked her with the back of the guitar. The next time, she snuck up behind me and shouted, "Boo!" right into my ear. Startled, I turned around too fast and hit her with my elbow. Then there was the cymbal incident. I was moving the big cymbal from the band room to the assembly hall, and since it was still locked in its stand and front heavy, I was holding it like a spear. I turned a corner and boom, decked her square in the chest. Another time, I was getting something from my locker when I saw a guy who liked to mess with me approaching from behind. Feeling someone graze my back, I spun around and jabbed at them with a leaky red pen. Turns out, it was her again. I even think I accidentally backhanded her while practicing the nay-nay. Don't judge, I was 12. But that memory is kind of fuzzy. I genuinely felt awful every time. But no one believed me. She and everyone else at school were convinced I was hitting her on purpose. People even started calling me girl hitter. It was humiliating, and no amount of apologizing or explaining seemed to change anyone's mind. I swear, with Reddit as my witness, I did not hit her on purpose. I did not. Story 14. Back in the early 90s, I was stationed at Nellis AFB in Las Vegas. I've ridden motorcycles my entire life, and being 22 and stationed there was no exception. One day, I went out riding with my buddy Mike. His girlfriend wanted to introduce me to her friend, Christy, who supposedly loved motorcycles. We met earlier in the day, and when the evening cooled, we decided to head out to Apex Dry Lake. Being young and feeling invincible, we loved to ride fast, especially on stretches of empty road. I was geared up with a full-face helmet and a leather jacket, which only added to that feeling of being bulletproof. Christy had only known me for a few hours, and it quickly became clear she wasn't an experienced passenger. Bikers will know what I mean. She was stiff, held on either too tightly or not at all, and was terrified of leaning into turns. We took a little used stretch of Las Vegas Boulevard north, a two-lane road in the middle of nowhere that was rendered obsolete when I-15 was built. The road was in decent condition, and there was no traffic to speak of, so we opened up the throttles. As my bike topped out at 105 miles per hour, I noticed a bird crossing the road ahead. I barely registered it, just a white L shape that blurred past. Then a second bird darted out, and I instinctively lowered my chin. Thump! The impact was heavy, and I immediately felt chaos erupt behind me. My passenger screamed, and I could hear her over the roar of the wind. Something no biker expects at that speed. I let off the throttle, trying to slow down, when I realized Christy was trying to get off the motorcycle. Panic set in. I reached back with my left hand and grabbed hold of whatever part of her clothing I could while yelling at her to sit down. Somehow, through sheer luck or divine intervention, I managed to get the bike under control and stop safely. Mike pulled up beside me, laughing so hard he could barely speak. His girlfriend looked horrified. Christy was still screaming as I yelled at her to get off the bike, which she did, promptly falling on her backside. That's when I saw it. Her face shield was absolutely plastered with blood, guts, and feathers. The bird had hit the top of my helmet and exploded, literally exploded. Not in a cartoonish way, but in an M80 and a goose-down pillow filled with chicken guts kind of way. The sight was both horrific and surreal. Mike described it as a sudden puff of feathers, like a pillow had detonated as he flew past the remains. I somehow managed to get Christy back on the bike and rode her home. I never heard from her again, and Mike and I eventually fell out of touch. But Christy, if by some chance you ever read this, I'm sorry. I hope you're doing well, and I truly regret the mental scar I probably left that day. This content may violate our usage policies. Did we get it wrong? Please tell us by giving this response a thumb. Story 15. One freezing night after work, I stopped to get gas and was approached by a homeless man who introduced himself as Miami. I usually hand over spare money to homeless people if I have any, and I try to make small talk even when I don't. It's important to treat people with dignity. After giving Miami a few dollars, one thing led to another, and I ended up driving him all around town. The night was surreal. He smoked crack in my car, made questionable offers about women at a cheap hotel, and even asked me to give another homeless person a ride. This went on until 4 or 5 a.m., when he finally went into a hotel room. I waited for him at first, but after half an hour I decided to leave. I neatly placed his plastic bags on the side of the road before driving off. The entire encounter was chaotic and uncomfortable, yet for some reason I remember it fondly. I know Miami probably thought he was taking advantage of me, and I cringe when I think about the girls he wanted me to meet. But it was bitterly cold, he had nothing, and I was able to help him stay warm and sheltered, at least for one night. I don't talk about this story much because I don't want it to come across as boasting, but it happened. Sometimes I catch myself wondering how Miami, the crack-smoking homeless man, is doing these days. Story 16. One night around 1 a.m., I was driving home after breaking up with my girlfriend. I was emotional and distracted, not thinking clearly. As I exited the motorway, or freeway for the Americans, a large truck in front of me suddenly swerved. I slammed on my brakes, confused. As I continued driving, I saw an animal in the road jumping frantically. It was a fox with a crisp packet stuck over its head. The poor thing couldn't see and was clearly distressed. Realizing it had narrowly escaped death from the truck but would likely be hit by another car, I put on my hazard lights and jumped out of my car. It was still on the slip road, door wide open. I crept toward the fox, but it sensed me and darted away. What followed was a frantic chase around a major roundabout, both of us dodging fast-moving cars. After 5 to 10 minutes, the fox seemed to give up. It let me approach. I carefully grabbed the edge of the crisp packet, and as soon as I had a hold, the fox yanked its head away. It paused, giving me what I swear was a grateful nod, and then darted off into the night. I was left standing there, adrenaline pumping, my car holding up a line of at least 10 vehicles on the slip road, door still hanging open. It was chaotic, but I couldn't help smiling as I got back in my car, knowing that little fox had a second chance at life. Story 17. That time, as a 25-year-old, I called the police to check for boogeymen under my bed, and they found all my bondage stuff. It was a Friday night, and I was cleaning the upstairs bathroom. Yes, on a Friday. I like to start the weekend fresh, don't judge me. My dog, aptly named Dog, was chilling on the landing outside the bathroom. To set the scene, you need to know that Dog was the worst guard dog ever. One time when I asked a neighbor to turn off my attic fan during a rainstorm, dog passed them on the stairs and hid in the basement instead of protecting the house. So I'm cleaning and suddenly dog starts to growl and bark. This was bizarre because he rarely barked, and when he did, it was usually a sad whimpering sound. But this time, bark, bark, growl, growl. I turned off the bathroom fan and stood next to him, trying to figure out what he was upset about. Then I heard the door to the garage closing. Being the genius who auditions for serial killer movies, I went downstairs to investigate. Nothing looked out of place except for one thing. The patio door was unlocked. Dog followed me, still growling. Nervous, I grabbed my keys and phone and took him out to my car parked on the street. Once safely in the car, I called the non-emergency police line to ask if someone could come by and check things out. They told me to call 911, so I did. Within minutes, suburb's finest arrived in full force. They checked the entire house but found nothing. One of the officers guessed that the wind might have rattled the door I'd heard closing. I say they found nothing, but they did discover the full set of bondage straps and other toys under my bed, all ready to be pulled out at a moment's notice. As the officers left, one of them glanced over his shoulder and said, "We even checked under the bed. You're safe. I'm not so sure about your dates, though." Face palm. Story 18. I love my dog and she saved my life, so she deserves all the attention in the world. When I was pregnant with my first baby, I was swelling up like a balloon. The hospital kept testing me for preeclampsia, but kept sending me home because my blood pressure wasn't quite high enough to diagnose it. Don't get me started. Around my third trimester, my dog, a retriever mix, started acting weird. She'd watch me constantly and follow me everywhere. She refused to go on walks with me. She'd just sit on the grass and nudge my legs until I went back inside. If my husband took her out, she'd be her normal, playful self, but not with me. As I got closer to my due date, she started sniffing and licking my legs a lot. A few nights I woke up to her breath in my face because she was literally watching me sleep. At first I thought she was just anxious about the baby coming or my awkward movements, but after the third sleepless night for her, I decided to call the hospital. I explained her strange behavior to the midwife, admitting it was a weird reason to call. Before I could even finish, she told me to come in immediately. The hospital ran more detailed tests and discovered I had severe preeclampsia. On top of that, I had placenta accreta, meaning my placenta wasn't supporting the baby adequately anymore. That night, they induced labor, and my baby girl was born 3 weeks early but perfectly healthy. Since then, I've had 2 more pregnancies, both normal, and my amazing dog has been by my side every step of the way. I trust her more than some doctors. She saved my life and my daughter's life, and I'll forever owe her. I repay her in snuggles, endless snuggles. Story 19. In 2011 to 2012, I spent a year backpacking in Australia. One evening, I was in Sydney at a small park near my hostel, drinking cheap goon, boxed wine, and smoking spliffs with a group of about 4 to 5 other guys. I was completely baked, holding a spliff in my hand, with another 1/4 ounce of weed in my pocket, when I heard my French friend whisper, "Police, police, police." Looking down the path, I saw 3 officers walking toward us. I thought I was absolutely screwed. The cops started interrogating us, playing good cop, bad cop. The bad cop kept threatening to arrest us, saying he could smell the weed from a block away. The good cops tried to sweet-talk us into consenting to a search. Eventually, the officers lost patience and decided to search us anyway, claiming our red eyes and the obvious smell gave them enough cause. When it was my turn, the cop told me to empty my pockets onto the bench. In my stone haze, I was convinced there was a way out of this. Some magical combination of words or actions could save me. I just had to figure it out. That's when I remembered my favorite magicians, Penn and Teller. I recalled their discussion about palming playing cards and thought, why not? As I emptied my pockets, I clumsily palmed the bag of weed, hiding it in my hand. It wasn't even a good attempt, but somehow the cop didn't notice. He patted me down and said I was clear. I couldn't believe my luck as the bad cop ranted about knowing one of us had weed, but being unable to prove it. When they finally let us go, I realized I'd hidden the spliff under my shoe on the ground. I hurriedly grabbed it and told my friends we needed to leave immediately. As we walked away, the cops started searching the ground and bushes behind us. Later that night, I found out the police came back to our hostel looking for me after finding the spliff. Luckily, I wasn't there. Story 20. When I was about 6 years old, I had a strange, vivid dream. In the dream, a hotel door card floated in the air, the kind you hang on the door to request privacy. The card had a little hook for the handle, and on it was a drawing of a penguin in a corner made by two orange walls. The penguin looked sad, staring at me, and beneath it was written, "In summer, the penguin is in his corner." Since I'm French, the text was actually, "En été, le pingouin est dans son coin." The next day, we were learning how to write in class. Our teacher started a sentence with, "In summer." Without thinking, I blurted out, "The penguin is in his corner." I was usually a quiet, well-behaved kid, so I felt embarrassed immediately. The teacher, visibly confused, turned to ask, "Who said that?" Nervously, I admitted it was me, expecting to get scolded. Instead, the teacher looked shaken. She turned to the chalkboard and wrote the full sentence, word for word as I had dreamed it. At the time, I didn't think much of it beyond the embarrassment of getting caught yelling in class. But years later, my family situation changed, and my stepfather ended up being my former PE teacher from elementary school. During a conversation, he recalled that incident. He said my teacher had been spooked by it, confiding to him, "I just thought of that sentence on the spot. I'd never written or said it before." It's the closest I've come to a paranormal experience. While I'm not a believer in the supernatural and always look for logical explanations, this event still baffles me. As a researcher in probability, I chalk it up to an extremely rare coincidence. But it's still the strangest story I have to tell. Story 21. After leaving the Marines 8 years ago, I was battling severe depression and suicidal thoughts. It had been that way since I was 13. By the summer of 2013, I'd resigned myself to the belief that I wouldn't see another year. A friend bought tickets for me and another buddy to see fish at an outdoor amphitheater. I wasn't a fan of fish, but I went along. We tailgated in the parking lot, and I steadily drank to dull my relentless social anxiety and dark thoughts. As the show neared, a woman from Colorado approached our group selling weed. Out of nowhere, the idea to ask if she had shrooms popped into my head. Turns out she did. A guy I'd met that day and am still friends with now kindly bought each of us an eighth. I ate the whole thing in one go, a rookie move in hindsight. Thankfully, it didn't go sideways. As we walked towards security, I began feeling something I hadn't experienced in ages. Wonder, childlike, unfiltered wonder. The sky darkened, and a massive rainstorm rolled in. The drops stung my skin, tiny ones like pinpricks and heavy ones like a weighted embrace. The world exploded into a kaleidoscope of color and life despite the stormy skies. For the first time, I was fully present. I was inside the moment, submerged in a level of connection to existence that meditation or mindfulness practices only dream of touching. I wasn't just alive, I was life. We reached our mezzanine seats, and the show was in full swing. As fish played Ocelot, the lights painted the torrential downpour, and the music seemed to merge with the storm. I danced sincerely for the first time in my life. Arms outstretched to the heavens, I felt the universe pouring down on me. In that moment, ego melted away. Everything, matter, sound, light, was just energy expressing itself in infinite, unique ways. I realized we are all part of the same 13.7 billion-year-old cosmos, alive together, dancing to celebrate our connection to one another. Tears of joy streamed down my face. That night, I slept deeply, peacefully, for the first time in years. I woke up the next morning as someone I barely recognized, a person who saved their own life. The urge to end it was gone. Therapy and antidepressants didn't feel like the only hope anymore. I'd found happiness, contentment, and the will to keep going. Psilocybin saved my life. To this day, it continues to help when I need a journey to reconnect with existence. I'm endlessly grateful for it. It gave me back to myself. Story 22. One day after a long stint at uni, I was wandering through the supermarket, zoned out and aimlessly picking up items. I wasn't really paying attention to where I was going, just floating like a ghost. I reached the vegetarian aisle and saw a larger man standing right in front of the section I needed. He appeared to have a helper with him, and I assumed he might have had some sort of mental disability. Impatiently, I decided to squeeze past him to grab my veggie sausages from the freezer. The door was one of those hinged ones that opened outward with a long handle running down its length. I grabbed the door, opened it, and reached in. What happened next was a disaster. I slipped, grabbed the door handle to stabilize myself, and started swinging back and forth like a kid on a carnival ride. My flailing only made things worse. I lost my footing again and in a spectacular mess, slammed straight into the poor man's chest. To add scale to the disaster, this guy was a good foot taller than me and solidly built. The scene looked like something out of a slapstick comedy sketch. I was just a clumsy ADHD mess, trying to squeeze into a space I had no business squeezing into. The man gave me a crestfallen look, towering over me, and said with quiet disappointment, "You know, you could have just asked me to move." I sputtered out a string of apologies, too mortified to speak properly, and rushed to the checkout. I paid and left as quickly as humanly possible. It remains one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. I still feel awful about the guy and how ridiculous the whole situation was. A complete and utter disaster. Story 23. During my chemo treatments, I hallucinated so badly that the hospital sent psychiatry to visit me twice, suspecting I might be schizophrenic. It was wild. I'd yell at my kids and boyfriend, "How can you not see the sheep in the kitchen? Their owners are knocking at the door, and no one is helping me." Or, at 4:30 a.m., I'd text my boyfriend, who worked night shifts, "People won't stop knocking on the windows and doors. I'm too scared to move. I don't want them knowing I'm here." Most people associate chemo with exhaustion and fatigue, and while that's true, I developed heart failure from chemo and was completely knocked out most of the time. No one talks about the mental toll. There were times I seriously questioned whether the treatment was worth enduring. I saw shadows, including one I called Shadow Man, who always seemed to lurk in the room. I heard voices. I had seizures that I can't even remember, where I ripped out IVs and bit ER staff. And I'm not an aggressive person, far from it. In calmer times, nurses always told me I was an easy patient. The only reason I kept going through the treatments was my children. I knew I had to fight for them, no matter how torturous it felt. It's been over a year and a half since then, and I'm still in therapy, trying to process what I went through. Cancer's brutal, but it's not just physical. The mental toll is immense, and it's something I wish more people understood. Story 24. I've always had vivid, incredibly realistic dreams. So real that as a kid, I'd cry in the mornings because the Goldfish rock band in my closet had left, or because my mom hadn't delivered on her promise to get me a pet dragon. Even as I got older, I'd occasionally wake up needing a few minutes to remember it was all just dreams. Except sometimes it wasn't. My first boyfriend in college, Sam, was a sweet, smart, romantic guy. We dated and lived together for about a year, but I had a recurring dream that he'd wake me in the middle of the night, grab my throat, and pin me to the bed. In the dream, he'd whisper that he was an immortal, highly advanced android who could snap every bone in my body without a second thought. He'd say he was made of solid metal and that nothing I could do would stop him. These dreams were disturbing, but I dismissed them. Sam was kind and gentle, and I couldn't fathom him doing anything like that in real life. Still, I always felt uneasy the day after one of those dreams. One summer night, we went to watch a meteor shower. Most of our friends stayed on campus, but Sam insisted we go to an abandoned water treatment plant in the forest for a better view. It was dark and remote, and though I was skeptical at first, he was right. The view was incredible. We climbed onto the roof to get the best angle, laying a blanket down to lie on. Rusty signs warned of a 100-foot drop into the water tank below. I was nervous, but Sam reassured me. Then out of nowhere, he leaned in and whispered in my ear, "I guess if the ceiling falls in, we'll get to see if I can actually die." In that instant, my entire body went cold. I realized those dreams weren't dreams at all. They were memories. Memories I had buried because they were too terrifying to accept. I stayed calm, pretending nothing was wrong until we left the forest. The whole time, I was hyper-aware of how isolated we were and how easily I could disappear there. The next morning, I broke up with him. I told him I just wasn't feeling it anymore because I was too scared to confront him. My friends were shocked and gave me a hard time about it since we'd been a well-liked couple. But I couldn't explain that Sam thought he was an immortal robot and had been threatening me in the dead of night. To this day, I sometimes question if it really happened. But when I think about that night in the forest, I know in my gut it wasn't just a dream. Story 25. This happened during the last weekend of college for me. My roommates and I decided to hit the bars one final time before heading off to the real world. My roommate's girlfriend dropped us off, and we started drinking heavily. Throughout our years living together, we had this couch that we all hated. It was cheap, uncomfortable, and universally despised. Since it was our last weekend with the couch, and since we were very drunk, We decided to go home and destroy it. Now here's an important detail. Two of us were history majors with a particular interest in Vikings. Naturally, our apartment was stocked with Viking-style swords, spears, and axes, because why wouldn't it be? Back at the apartment, we unleashed our arsenal on the couch. It was glorious mayhem as we hacked and stabbed the thing to shreds. Afterward, everyone began winding down. One roommate was brushing his teeth, another was in bed with his girlfriend, getting ready for some sea time. But I wasn't done with the couch. I decided it needed one more stab for good measure. I grabbed a sword, held the hilt in one hand and the blade in the other, and went for it. Big mistake. A cloud of blood shot up as I realized I had sliced through my left hand. My fingers were a ruined mess. Panicking, I got my roommate, the one without a girlfriend, to help. He tried to tourniquet my arm with some t-shirts, but it didn't work. We realized I needed to go to the hospital. We interrupted our other roommate's side time to tell his girlfriend, the only sober person, that she needed to drive me. They wrapped my hand in a towel and off we went. I couldn't stop laughing the entire ride. At the hospital, I had bled through everything. The nurses rushed me back. One older nurse, who looked like someone's sweet grandma, asked how it happened. I told her, I was drunk and stabbed a couch with a sword. Her response? Stupid-ass boys stabbing shit with swords. I cried, laughing. While the doctor stitched me up, I was fading in and out from blood loss. Suddenly, I saw my roommate fly past the ER window in a wheelchair, with a security guard chasing him. That snapped me back to full consciousness, and I started laughing uncontrollably again. Now, 11 years later, I have massive scars on my hand that still hurt occasionally, but I also have a sword injury story, so worth it? Story 26. 5 years ago, my family pressured me into joining their business. Being an introverted person, the idea of constantly interacting with different people gave me severe anxiety and panic attacks. But I gave in, believing that doing something for the family was the right thing to do. Fast forward to now, and my anxiety and panic attacks have subsided somewhat. But when I look at my friends who've moved to new countries and built successful careers, I can't help but feel depressed. I'm married now, with a child, and I often worry about the kind of life I'll be able to provide for them. I've been living frugally, saving every penny for my kids' future and my retirement. But in doing so, I feel like I've forgotten how to live. Sometimes I wonder how different my life would have been if I'd stood up for myself back then. Instead, I let others convince me that staying and helping my family was for the greater good. I moved to a Tier 3 city to look after my parents, believing it was the right choice. But now I see the cost. There's no moral high ground in sacrificing your own well-being for others. I curse myself for not standing up for what I wanted when it mattered most. Still, I try to accept my reality. I focus on providing for my family and hope that one day I'll find peace in the choices I made. But deep down, I wish I'd fought harder for myself. Story 27. My youngest brother had 2 guinea pigs that he didn't take great care of, so my parents took over. One day they offered my wife and me the older guinea pig, Peaches, since she was calm and good with my 3-year-old son. We took her in and followed the same care routine. Fresh vegetables, frequent cuddles, and baths, swims for exercise. One day I was giving Peaches a bath. This time, I let her go under the running faucet and she didn't come back up. Panicking, I grabbed her, flipped her upside down, and started chest compressions with 2 fingers, doing my best to mimic CPR for a baby. In the middle of this chaos, my wife yells from down the hall, "My water just broke." She was in labor with our daughter. Meanwhile, I'm shouting for her to look up guinea pig CPR while using my feet to nudge the door closed so my 3-year-old wouldn't see his first pet potentially die. Miraculously, I managed to revive Peaches. I wrapped her in a towel and placed her back in her home before rushing my wife to the hospital. At the hospital, it became clear labor wasn't progressing, so I left to pack an overnight bag while my son stayed with my parents. Back at home, Peaches was still wrapped in the towel where I'd left her. She wasn't shivering anymore, but her hair was matted and covered in wood chips. I quickly dried her off, loved on her, and gave her a gentle rinse with slow-running water. My daughter was eventually born via emergency C-section after nearly 24 hours of labor. She wasn't breathing at first, and I thought we had lost her. Luckily, she pulled through, though my wife couldn't see what was happening. I reassured her everything was fine. When we brought our daughter home, we introduced her to Peaches. Peaches lived another 8 months, passing peacefully in her sleep. My parents buried her in a tightly sealed container on their acreage. Peaches may have been just a guinea pig, but she was a cherished part of our family. Story 28. About 3 years ago, my wife was pregnant with our second child. At her 12-week checkup, the doctors performed a blood test to check for genetic abnormalities. A week or two later, she got the phone call every expectant mother dreads. The baby had tested positive for Turner syndrome. She was in tears and I was too stunned to speak. The next day, we drove 45 minutes to see a genetic counselor. We were terrified and unsure of what to expect. Our 2-year-old son came along, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. To him, it was just another errand with mom and dad. In the waiting room, another family came in with their kids. The woman was very pregnant. As the kids giggled, explored, and ate snacks messily, it struck me how their innocent energy contrasted with the anxiety we adults carried. For a moment, it felt like we were just waiting for new tires or something equally mundane. But then there was another woman in the room. She was tall, African American, with long, tightly wound braids, wearing sandals and a brightly patterned dress. She looked older, maybe in her late 30s, and was very pregnant, probably 6 to 8 months along. She sat off to the side, staring straight ahead with a grim, vacant expression. She didn't react to the kids or acknowledge anyone. She was completely alone, processing what I could only imagine were feelings of fear, dread, and sadness. At the time, I naively assumed we were all in the same boat. But in hindsight, her situation was likely much worse. She was further along in her pregnancy, and she didn't have a hopeful glimmer like we did. We learned the test has a high false positive rate for Turner syndrome, giving us a chance this could all be a mistake. That woman's face, however, was devoid of hope. It was filled with sadness. Thankfully, an amniocentesis later confirmed the test result was a false positive. Our daughter was born perfectly healthy. But when I think back to that time, I often picture that woman in the waiting room. I feel something akin to survivor's guilt, wondering if she found a way through her pain. I don't know if I could have. Story 29. When my son was 6, his mother and I divorced, which was hard on him. A few years later, I went through another serious relationship that ended badly. My son had grown attached to my partner, so he experienced another wave of loss and anger. By the time he was 14, he was hanging out with overprivileged, undersupervised kids. Sharing custody with his mom made it hard to manage, especially since she was more lenient than I was. Things started spiraling. He skipped school, shoplifted, and eventually I got the dreaded call from the police. When I picked him up, he was terrified. I made no effort to reassure him, letting him feel the weight of his choices. Soon after, his grades plummeted. He wasn't just apathetic, he was failing. Then his mom called to announce that he was dropping out of school and wanted to live with her full-time, where he could play video games and smoke pot all day. She even shopped for a therapist to diagnose him with academic inhibition syndrome. I was devastated but had to respect his decision. However, when I heard she was leaving for a 2-week business trip, I insisted he stay with me instead of being left alone. He came over furious, but I kept him busy with chores. One day he asked to babysit for his aunt, but when I called her later, she had no idea what he was talking about. He had lied and gone out with his friends. I tracked him down to a friend's house where he and his buddies stumbled out of a car, clearly inebriated. When he refused to get in my car, I followed him into the woods, suit and all. He cursed me out, trying to push every button he could. But I told him, I don't care if you hate me right now. I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe, even if that makes me the asshole. Eventually, he got in the car, and I worked from home for the rest of the week to keep an eye on him. When his mom returned, she arranged for him to stay with her sister, who I trusted. After that, he refused to talk to me for weeks. I kept calling, leaving the door open. A few months later, he agreed to have dinner. I kept the conversation light, and soon we had weekly dinners, rebuilding our relationship slowly. The next school year, he changed schools, left his bad friends behind, and repeated the 9th grade. He worked his way up from B's and C's to straight A's. He crushed his SATs, and we grew closer as he matured. He got into college on probationary status, but he thrived. While his peers were partying, he'd tell them, "Not tonight. I've already been through all that." He graduated with high honors in biochemistry and became a veterinary assistant. 3 years later, he called me, something he rarely did unprompted, to tell me he'd been accepted to veterinary school. I pulled over and wept tears of relief and joy. He graduated in the top 5 of his class, did a prestigious internship, and became an emergency veterinarian. He fell in love, got married, and had a son. Now he balances being a part-time veterinarian and primary caregiver to his toddler, while his wife, a PhD, manages clinical trials in autism. We've come so far from the dark years. My son occasionally jokes, "Aw, Dad, I always knew I'd get my shit together." I couldn't be prouder of him. Those struggles were painful, but they've made me appreciate him and our relationship in ways I never imagined. Story 30. I was substituting for a band class at a local high school. For some reason, all the instrument groups scattered into separate practice rooms, but the drum line stayed in the main room with me. Being a musician myself, I had recently purchased a pair of fancy earplugs that came in a keychain. I had never used them before, but I was excited to try them out. As the drum line played, I popped the earplugs in and enjoyed the practice. At the end of class, I went to remove them, but I realized I had put one in upside down, and I couldn't pull it out. I was absolutely terrified. After fumbling for a few minutes, I had to ask a student for help. They tried to assist, but no luck. By this point, I couldn't hear out of that ear, and the students knew something was wrong. Embarrassed and panicked, I decided to find the school nurse during lunch, but she wasn't there. Finally, I went out to my car and used the rearview mirror to try to remove it. After several more minutes of struggling, I finally managed to get it out. My ear was bright red, and I was so rattled I wasn't the same for the rest of the day. Later, I decided to leave a review on Amazon for the earplugs, only to notice the product page was full of warnings in bold capital letters. Make sure to insert with the tab on top. It probably said that on the package too, but I had just been using the keychain without reading any instructions. Now I'm scared to use those earplugs again. It was such a stressful day for something that should have been so simple. Story 31. If you have allergies, even if they're not food allergies, always carry an EpiPen. I learned this the hard way during a terrifying experience. I'm allergic to cats, dogs, trees, weeds, dust, mold, you name it. One day I received my immunotherapy injection near the end of my treatment plan when I was about to transition to maintenance shots. Everything seemed fine at first. We lived 30 minutes away from the allergy center and hospital, but thankfully my mom had to stop at a nearby Kohl's afterward. During class, I noticed the injection site looked odd. I didn't think much of it because I'd been getting shots for a while. Within minutes, I started coughing and wheezing. Thinking it had triggered my asthma, I took emergency allergy meds and called my mom. She was checking out but came to the car quickly. By the time she got there, I could barely speak without coughing. My mom initially thought we should drive home to get my inhaler, but before we even left the parking lot, my breathing got so bad I could barely choke out the word yes when she asked if we should go to the hospital. At the ER, they wheeled me back immediately and put me on oxygen. My O2 level had dropped to 81%, and the doctors were worried the epinephrine might not work. They gave me epinephrine, Benadryl, and other medications and took blood tests. Within hours, I felt completely fine. I went from being unable to breathe in the afternoon to feeling normal by the evening. It was surreal. Looking back, I realized how close I came to suffocating. If my mom hadn't stopped at Kohl's, or if she had decided to drive home instead of straight to the hospital, I might not have made it. EpiPens are expensive, but they're a lifesaver. Even if you don't need one yourself, you might save someone else's life someday. It's better to be prepared than to take the risk.